What if I told you that your entire life, your success, your failure, your future is not years away, it's one decision away, not 10, not 100, just one. One choice you've been delaying, one move you've been afraid to make, one moment of courage that separates the life you're living from the life you keep imagining. We spend so much of our lives believing that change is something distant, something complex, something reserved for the right time. We convince ourselves that transformation requires a perfect storm of opportunity, resources, and readiness. But the truth is far simpler and far more uncomfortable. Change begins the moment a decision is made. Not a plan, not a dream, not a wish, but a decision. That instant where you draw a line between who you have been and who you are willing to become. It's not loud. It's not always visible. But it is powerful because everything that follows, every action, every habit, every result flows from that single moment of choice. Think about how often you've stood at that edge. You knew what needed to be done. You felt it deep down, that quiet voice telling you to act, to move, to step forward. But instead of deciding, you delayed. You negotiated with yourself. I'll start tomorrow. I'll wait until things are better. And in that hesitation, nothing changed. Not because you lacked ability, but because you withheld decision. The difference between people who evolve and those who remain the same isn't talent or luck, it's decisiveness. The willingness to say, this is it. I'm not going back. A single choice carries more weight than we give it credit for because it shifts your identity. When you decide, truly decide, you are no longer the person you were before that moment. You are someone who has committed, someone who has drawn a boundary, someone who has chosen a direction. And that internal shift changes how you think, how you act, and how you respond to challenges. You don't hesitate the same way. You don't retreat as quickly. Because now you have something stronger than motivation. You have conviction. The reason this is so powerful is because life doesn't demand that you change everything at once. It only asks that you change something. One decision leads to one action. That action leads to another. And before you realize it, momentum is built. But without that first decision, there is no momentum, only intention. And intention without action is just a story we tell ourselves to feel better about staying still. The breakthrough isn't in doing everything perfectly. It's in deciding to begin. What makes this even more challenging is that decisions often require you to let go of something familiar. It might be comfort, habits, excuses, or even people who no longer align with where you're going. And that's why so many avoid making that one choice, because it's not just about what you gain, it's about what you leave behind. But growth has always required sacrifice. You cannot step into a different life while holding on to everything from your old one. The decision is the bridge between those two worlds. And here's the part most people overlook. Once you make that decision, the world begins to respond differently. Opportunities that once felt invisible start to appear. Your focus sharpens. Your energy shifts. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because you did. Your decision alters your perception, your effort, and your persistence. It puts you in motion, and motion creates possibility. But none of that happens until you decide. Until you stop waiting, stop doubting, and claim responsibility for the direction of your life. Fear is one of the most misunderstood forces in human life. Most people treat it like a stop sign, something that appears to warn them away from risk, change, or ambition. But fear was never meant to be a barrier. It was meant to be a signal. A gatekeeper standing at the threshold of growth, asking a simple question. Are you ready to move beyond who you've been? The moment you feel fear, it usually means you are standing close to something that matters, something that could stretch you, reshape you, or elevate you. Yet instead of interpreting it as direction, most people interpret it as danger. The strange truth about fear is that it appears most strongly right before transformation. When you are about to speak in public, start something new, leave something familiar, or step into uncertainty, fear rises. Not because you are incapable, but because your mind is trying to protect you from the unknown. It clings to familiarity because familiarity feels safe. But safe is not the same as meaningful. Fear is not proof that you should stop. It is often proof that you are on the edge of something important. The question is not whether fear will show up. It always does. The question is what you will do when it arrives. Most people misunderstand courage as the absence of fear. That is false. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement despite it. It is the decision to act while your mind is still uncertain. It is the willingness to step forward even when your comfort zone is pulling you backward. The strongest individuals are not those who never feel fear, but those who learn to walk with it. They recognize it, acknowledge it, and move anyway. And in doing so, they prove something essential: fear does not control them. It only challenges them. There is also a hidden pattern in life that few notice until they reflect deeply. Every major breakthrough you admire, whether in careers, relationships, or personal growth, has a moment of fear attached to it. Someone had to speak when they were afraid. Someone had to leave when it was uncomfortable. Someone had to start when nothing was certain. That moment of fear was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new one. And what separated them from others was not confidence. It was willingness. Willingness to move through discomfort instead of retreating into safety. Fear also has a way of exaggerating consequences. It paints worst-case scenarios as if they are guaranteed outcomes. It convinces you that failure is final, rejection is permanent, and mistakes are irreversible. But reality rarely matches fear's predictions. In most cases, what you fear either does not happen or becomes far more manageable than expected. The mind builds walls that reality never enforces. And when you finally step through those walls, you realize they were illusions built from hesitation, not truth. The most important shift happens when you stop asking, "How do I get rid of fear?" and start asking, "What is fear pointing me toward?" Because fear often highlights the exact direction where growth exists. It shows you the places where your current self ends and your next version begins. Instead of resisting it, you learn to read it. Instead of avoiding it, you use it as a compass. And in that moment, fear loses its power as a barrier and becomes what it was always meant to be: a signal that you are standing at the edge of something greater than your comfort zone. Comfort is one of the most deceptive forces in life. It does not announce itself as a threat. It does not feel dangerous. In fact, it feels like peace, like safety, like control. But beneath that calm surface, comfort quietly drains potential. It convinces you to stay where things are familiar, where effort is minimal, and where risk is avoided. The problem is not that comfort exists. The problem is when comfort becomes the default setting of your life. Because over time, comfort doesn't just protect you, it limits you. The cost of comfort is rarely visible in the short term. Today, choosing comfort feels harmless. Skipping the workout, delaying the project, avoiding the difficult conversation. It all feels small in the moment. But life is not built in moments, it is built in accumulation. One small, comfortable decision repeated over time becomes a pattern. And that pattern slowly defines your direction. While you feel safe, you are actually standing still. And standing still in a world that is constantly moving is its own form of loss. What makes comfort so dangerous is that it disguises stagnation as stability. You tell yourself you are fine where you are. You convince yourself that there is no urgency. But growth never comes from fine. It comes from discomfort, from pressure, from challenge. Comfort keeps you in a controlled environment where nothing stretches you. But without stretch, there is no expansion. Without resistance, there is no strength. Comfort feels like protection, but it quietly removes the conditions required for evolution. There is also a psychological trap inside comfort. It lowers your expectations over time. When you repeatedly avoid difficulty, your mind adjusts to that level of ease. Things that once felt necessary begin to feel optional. Goals that once felt urgent begin to feel distant. You slowly negotiate with yourself until your standards shrink to match your comfort zone. And once your standards shrink, your life follows. Not because you lack ability, but because you stop demanding more from yourself. The irony is that discomfort often leads to the very things people say they want: success, confidence, independence, respect. Yet those outcomes require effort, repetition, and risk. They require you to step into situations where you might fail, look inexperienced, or feel uncertain. Comfort avoids all of that. But in doing so, it also avoids growth. The price of avoiding discomfort is not just missed opportunities, it is the gradual weakening of your potential. Because every time you choose ease over effort, you teach yourself that comfort is more important than progress. Eventually, comfort becomes a cage that you cannot see. You are not physically trapped, but mentally conditioned. The boundaries are invisible yet powerful. You stop exploring new paths because the old ones feel easier. You stop taking risks because predictability feels safer. And slowly, without noticing, your world becomes smaller, not because it has shrunk, but because you have stopped expanding it. Comfort does not destroy life in one moment. It narrows it over time. Breaking free from this cycle does not require extreme action. It requires intentional discomfort. Choosing what challenges you instead of what relaxes you. Choosing what grows you instead of what soothes you temporarily. It is in these small, repeated decisions that transformation begins. Because every time you step outside comfort, you expand your capacity. And every expansion creates space for a different version of your life, one that comfort alone could never reach. The feeling of being stuck is one of the most convincing illusions the mind creates. It feels real, heavy, and permanent. People say, I can't change my job, I can't leave this situation, or this is just how my life is. But in most cases, what they are describing is not actual confinement. It is repeated choice. The belief of being stuck often comes from long-term patterns of staying in the same place, not from an absence of options. And that distinction changes everything, because if something is a pattern, it can be changed. What we call stuck is usually the result of accumulated decisions that favored familiarity over discomfort. Every time you chose to delay action, every time you avoided risk, every time you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, that became part of a larger pattern. Over time, that pattern creates the feeling of limitation. But limitation is not always external. Often, it is internal repetition. You are not physically locked in most situations. You are psychologically conditioned to remain where things feel predictable. One of the hardest truths to accept is that staying is also a decision. It feels passive, but it is not. Every day you remain in a situation you claim to be stuck in, you are making a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to continue. The mind resists this idea because it removes the comfort of blame. It is easier to say, I have no choice, than to admit I am choosing not to act. But awareness changes responsibility, and responsibility, though uncomfortable, is the first step toward change. Fear and familiarity often work together to create the illusion of being trapped. Familiar environments feel safer because they are known, even if they are unfulfilling. The mind prefers predictable discomfort over unpredictable opportunity. So even when better options exist, fear whispers that change is risky, uncertain, or too difficult. And because of that, many people remain in situations not because they must, but because they have grown accustomed to them. Familiar pain becomes more tolerable than unfamiliar possibility. Another layer to this illusion is the belief that change requires perfect timing or perfect conditions. People wait for motivation, for clarity, for confidence. But those conditions rarely arrive on their own. They are created through action. While waiting feels like preparation, it often becomes delay. And delay, repeated over time, solidifies into a lifestyle that feels permanent. The longer you wait, the more convincing the illusion of being stuck becomes. Yet the exit was never removed. It was simply not used. The most empowering realization is that movement breaks the illusion. Even the smallest action disrupts the feeling of being stuck. A conversation you have been avoiding, a habit you begin changing, a decision you finally make. These actions prove that change is possible. Once movement begins, the mind recalibrates. It stops saying, I can't, and starts recognizing, I am changing. Because the truth is, you are not as stationary as you think. You are just repeatedly choosing the same direction. And the moment you choose differently, your entire experience of being stuck begins to dissolve. One of the most common traps people fall into is the belief that clarity must come before action. They wait for the perfect understanding, the complete plan, the absolute certainty that they are making the right move. They believe that once everything makes sense, then they will start. But life rarely works in that order. Clarity is not the starting point. It is the result. It is something that emerges only after you begin moving, not before. When you stay still and overthink, your mind creates endless possibilities, most of them based on fear rather than reality. You imagine outcomes that may never happen. You analyze situations that are not fully understood yet. And in that mental loop, confusion grows. The more you wait for certainty, the more uncertain everything feels. Because clarity does not grow in stillness, it gets buried in it. Thinking alone cannot reveal direction. It can only process what is already known. But growth requires stepping into what is unknown. Action changes this completely. The moment you begin doing something, anything related to your goal, you shift from imagination to experience. And experience is where clarity begins. You start noticing what works and what doesn't. You see what feels right and what doesn't align. You gather real feedback from reality instead of assumptions from your mind. That feedback becomes your teacher. And slowly, confusion starts to turn into understanding. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because you are finally interacting with the real world instead of a mental version of it. There is also a hidden strength in imperfect action. People often delay because they want to avoid mistakes. They believe mistakes mean failure. But in reality, mistakes are part of the learning process that produces clarity. Every wrong step eliminates another wrong option. Every attempt refines your direction. Without action, you remain stuck with possibilities that exist only in theory. With action, you begin narrowing those possibilities into something real. Progress is not about being right immediately. It is about learning faster than hesitation can hold you back. Another important truth is that confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a byproduct of it. Many people believe they need confidence before they start something new, but confidence is built through repetition, not preparation. The first attempt is often uncertain. The second is slightly better. The 10th carries more stability. And over time, what once felt unfamiliar becomes natural. But none of that happens if the first step is never taken. Waiting for confidence before acting is like waiting to feel strong before lifting weights. The strength only appears after the effort. Action also breaks the illusion of fear-based thinking. When you stay inactive, your mind has unlimited space to exaggerate risks. But when you act, reality replaces imagination. You discover that many fears were larger in thought than in experience. Challenges that seemed overwhelming become manageable once faced. Uncertainty turns into information, and information is what leads to clarity. The unknown becomes known only through engagement, not observation from a distance. Ultimately, clarity is not something you receive, it is something you build. It is constructed through movement, trial, adjustment, and persistence. Every step you take adds another piece to the picture, and over time, what once felt like confusion begins to form direction. But that direction only reveals itself to those who are willing to move without seeing the full map. Because the map is not given first, it is drawn as you walk. Most people think of the future as something far away, something that will eventually arrive on its own, shaped by time, luck, or external events. But the future is not an isolated destination. It is an accumulation. It is being built silently and consistently through the choices you make right now. Every moment you live is not just passing. It is becoming. And what it becomes depends entirely on how you use it. The present moment is powerful because it is the only place where influence exists. You cannot change yesterday, and you cannot control tomorrow. But everything that will define tomorrow is being shaped in today. The actions you take right now, no matter how small, are laying down the structure of your future life. Whether it is your habits, your discipline, your focus, or your decisions, each one is like a brick being placed in a structure you will eventually have to live inside. And the quality of that structure depends on the quality of your present choices. What makes this even more significant is how subtle these decisions often are. It is rarely one dramatic choice that defines a future. Instead, it is the repetition of small ones, choosing discipline over distraction, choosing effort over avoidance, choosing growth over comfort. These choices may feel insignificant in the moment, but they accumulate over time. And accumulation is what creates transformation. A life does not change in one leap. It changes through consistent direction. Many people underestimate the present because it feels ordinary. There is no dramatic feeling attached to it, no obvious turning point. But that is exactly why it is so powerful. The present does not announce its importance, it reveals it later. What feels like a simple decision today becomes a defining moment when seen from the future. The workout you chose to do, the skill you chose to practice, the opportunity you chose to pursue, all of it may seem small now, but becomes meaningful in hindsight. There is also a dangerous habit of postponing effort into an imagined future version of yourself. People often say, I will start later, or I will change when things are better. But that future version of you is not magically different. That version is being shaped or neglected by what you are doing right now. Waiting for the right time is often just a delay disguised as planning. And while you wait, the present continues to build a future that may not match your expectations. The truth is, your future self is silently relying on the decisions you are making today. Not tomorrow, not someday. Today. The discipline you build now becomes the strength you carry later. The habits you repeat now become the lifestyle you live later. The courage you show now becomes the confidence you rely on later. There is no separation between present action and future outcome. They are directly connected, even if the results take time to appear. This understanding shifts everything. It removes excuses tied to timing and replaces them with responsibility in the present. It forces awareness of how valuable each moment really is. Because once you realize that your future is being constructed in real time, you stop treating the present casually. You start treating it as the foundation of everything you hope to become. So when you step back and look at your life, understand this clearly. Nothing is permanently holding you back except the decisions you keep repeating. The future you want is not hidden in some distant moment. It is being shaped in what you choose right now, in silence, in small actions, in quiet discipline. You are not waiting for a new life to arrive. You are building it, one decision at a time. And maybe that is the real turning point, realizing you don't need everything figured out. You just need to move differently than you did yesterday. Because the moment you change your decision, even slightly, you change your direction. And when direction changes, destination always follows.